I had my attention directed to the following tweet the other day. Indeed, therapy culture is designed by and for women. The whole thing is an extension of the communicate for its own sake that you mentioned. I've seen it do unspeakable damage to men. Initially, I was just going to respond to it in text on Minds, because trying to write a detailed reply in Twitter is like scraping my forehead against a cheese grater. But then my response got so long that I said to myself, I should make this an episode of Men's Mental Health. Hello once again from the Prim Reaper. It's the darndest thing sometimes, how an idea can come up and pique your interest so much that you just have to write a whole essay on it. Or maybe that's just me being a nerd. First, I'm glad the initial individual said therapy culture is designed by women for women, because that part I can agree with. Early therapeutic interventions, on the other hand, were largely began by male therapists, and I think the founding fathers of psychology had some excellent ideas about different ways of conceptualizing our thoughts, emotions, and behaviors. Look at Ivan Pavlov and B.F. Skinner and the ideas of classical and operant conditioning as means of shaping behaviors. Look at Carl Rogers and the idea that a therapist that is genuine, congruent, and who shows unconditional positive regard can help individuals come to see themselves in more realistic and positive manners. Look at existential psychology and the idea that states such as anxiety and depression are normal experiences on the path of development, and that we use these and other experiences to define our lives and make meaning for ourselves. Look at the tenets of cognitive behavioral therapy that state that we have the power to control the way we think about an experience, and that in doing so, we can change the way we feel about that experience overall. All of these are fascinating ideas to me, and I have long enjoyed studying them and seeing the many ways in which they can contribute to and facilitate healing for individuals in many different ways. But what, then, is this original poster referring to when they mention therapy culture? I think it can be boiled down to the Hallmark card cheesy Instagram photo of a woman standing arms askew under a rainfall with cursive font that says, "Mental health is a state of mind." Oversimplification of the whole idea of mental health and the path towards it. It's the nice little ditty that looks innocuous on its face, but can actually pose a real problem. The idea can be summarized as follows. People's mental health is worse than ever these days. There's such a stigma around mental health that nobody is willing to talk about it. If only we destigmatize mental health issues, then we would have more people who are willing to open up and share what's wrong with them, and then that would lead to better mental health outcomes. You know, never mind the fact that we live in a time where mental health concerns are apparently so stigmatized that people feel compelled to list their many maladies in their profile descriptions as a key defining feature of self. Where you can't throw a rock without hitting someone talking about how mental health needs to be destigmatized for the 90th time. Where we have an entire week dedicated to talking openly about mental health, or when people talk about the pandemic we're currently living through, for many, the main concern is not contracting the virus, but the way pandemic life is impacting people's mental health. But I digress. Forgive me for sounding a little bit sarcastic here, but as a professional who has trained for the better part of a decade to be able to serve as a counselor and hopefully eventually become a registered psychologist, it's honestly a little insulting to see the idea of mental health dumbed down so completely. I'm going to challenge this in two main ways. First, in the psychology textbook super nerd kind of way, and second, in the "so how is this idea harmful to men" way. I read an article I really appreciated in my counseling practicum. It's titled "The Journey of the Counselor and Therapist: Research Findings and Perspectives on Professional Development." It talks about the phases of therapist development as one moves through their educational and career development, from the lay helper phase to the beginning and advanced student, to the novice and practiced professional, and finally to the senior professional. I'll spare all of the details, but I want to focus on some sections from the lay helper section, the spot at which a person who fancies themselves a helper but has no formal training of any kind. See if any of these lines sound familiar to you. The lay helper typically identifies the problem quickly, provides strong emotional support, and gives advice based on one's own experience. The lay helper is guided by a personal epistemology and common sense conceptions of how to assist others when in distress. He or she typically projects one's own solutions for the problems encountered. An unexamined quality of how best to assist can contribute to over-involvement. Over-involvement and strong identification with the person being helped may fuel an inclination to give specific and strong advice. So, to put this in the context of therapy culture, we have this idea from some individuals where they desperately want to provide that emotional support for someone to open up, someone who is giving advice to others on what they need, perhaps based on their own experience of opening up and sharing their feelings being helpful to them, and believing that everything that they needed in order to feel better about their situation will therefore be the solution to someone else's concerns as well. I mean, hey, even if it doesn't fix everything, at least finally opening up will make you feel better, right? What could possibly go wrong? So now let's flip into the men's mental health section of the video and explore this a little bit more deeply. I'm going to start off by saying that I am not trying to say that talk therapy can't be helpful for men. Not only because I have personally seen many examples where it has been helpful, but also just in general for men and women, I think, with a bolded 16-point asterisk next to this, that the right therapist can help to more deeply explore their perspectives and to provide alternate perspectives that may help them to work through or refocus their concerns in a new light. And that asterisk is extremely important because I think we all here in this circle of individuals have seen how many ways the wrong kind of therapist can not only be ineffective at helping men in need, but downright harmful. On the most benign side, you can imagine a therapist, perhaps with little to no experience in the situation with what a man is dealing with, trying to ineffectively offer solutions that don't align with the man's situation, or even just his conceptual web of how life works. Maybe they'll offer a few thought experiments or a homework exercise that is completely off base and that the man says he'll do, but in reality absolutely won't, and simply quietly won't book another session, writing it off as useless to his problem and never returning. I feel like this scenario happens unfortunately often. Part of this, I think, is because people rush to push men towards seeking mental health support when their problems may not really be solved by talking about them. In fact, talking about them may be more like rubbing salt in the wound, actually. Envision a man tens or even hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt from a bad legal case with his ex-spouse, wondering how in the world he is going to prevent the foreclosure of his mortgage next week. I'm sorry to say, that kind of situation is not going to be helped by paying $100 or more to see a psychologist. This is to say nothing of the men who process their thoughts and emotions better in different settings, like in groups with other men sharing similar stories, or even just with friends around a campfire or a table of board games. Or the men who choose to process their emotions internally, who may require that calm internal space to parse out their situation. The assumption that a man who is not sharing his thoughts is a man bottling up his emotions is a misguided one. He might be, but he might also be analyzing internally, planning, or even just trying to take a moment of mental respite. Acting like talk therapy is the best or even only solution to mental and emotional turmoil is like saying that ice cream is the best dessert ever. For some, it may be, but for someone whose favorite dessert is a hot fudge brownie, ice cream may be a substandard replacement. But I think also there's an unfortunate lack of understanding in the psychology world these days about the best ways to help men, not only because of an increased focus on female and multicultural perspectives in the field, which would be fine if this didn't appear to come at the expense of almost eliminating male perspectives. But worse, because pervasive social justice theories in the field have often left new therapists with no positive or productive ways to work with men, and even worse, has left them believing in negative stereotypes that make it harder than ever for them to be able to relate to men with any real understanding or empathy, barring some intense external and unbiased self-study on the subject. If you want a perfect example of this, look to the APA guidelines on men and boys that I have long criticized in the past. You can't positively relate to men in therapy while believing that all of their problems rest within them. I guarantee you, you are never going to be able to build a proper alliance with those kind of assumptions under your belt. Heck, how many men out there right now are reluctant to share their feelings with others because they have tried it in the past and have been regarded negatively, dismissed, or insulted for being less of a man? I think that the right therapist, who works hard to study and understand the problems of the men they seek to work with, who is able to take their perspective and relate to them in a genuinely positive manner, and who is able to pivot to the different needs of their clients, I think that can be a legitimate help to many, many men in need of support. However, I think until that becomes a more commonplace happenstance in the psychology world, I think the whole therapy culture idea of if only more men would open up and share their feelings, their mental health would be so much better, is heavily misplaced. But on that note, if any of you do feel like opening up and sharing your thoughts and feelings, well, an HBR episode of Men's Mental Health is a pretty safe place to do it if I do say so myself.